Amelia Mitchell wrapped her father's wool sweater tighter around her frame, the coarse fibers brushing against her neck like an old memory she hadn't asked to feel again. Her fingers, thin from hunger, trembled as she lifted her inventory journal, the leather cracked along the spine from years of use. She didn't need to look at the entries to know what they said, but habit was stronger than despair. 2 cans of beans, half a sack of weevil-riddled flour, 3 sprouting potatoes. The numbers didn't lie. They simply waited to bury her. She closed the book and leaned her weight onto the table, the wood creaking under the pressure. Her leg ached with a bone-deep stubbornness that no medicine could ease anymore. It wasn't just the pain. It was what the pain meant. A broken life. A broken plan. 3 months ago, a snake's sudden hiss had sent her steady horse rearing beside the canyon trail. The fall had been sharp, fast, and unforgettable. The sound of bone against rock, the scream echoing into the empty ravine. Her pride had dragged her back to the ranch house on elbows and fists, leaving a bloody trail like a warning to the sky. Now the leg bent wrong, swelled without reason, and answered every temperature drop with agony. She kept the crutch by the stove like a dog she never liked but needed. Just to get across the room, she had to brace herself with one breath and hope the floor didn't fall away. Still she moved. That was the only rule that mattered now, move or die. The kettle was empty again. She gathered snow from the porch in a rusted pan, her hand raw from the cold, and set it on the iron stove, feeding the fire one of her last splinters of kindling. As the snow hissed into water, she dared a scoop of coffee grounds, barely a teaspoon. No sugar, no milk, just grit and warmth. She drank it slowly, letting the heat work into her throat, her chest, her soul. It didn't change her circumstances, but it softened the sharp edges for a moment. A wind howled low, testing the seams of the house. She glanced at the firewood stack, 6 pieces left. If she kept the stove low, maybe 3 days. Maybe. She scribbled the date and the count in her journal, hand shaking from more than cold. She knew she'd made mistakes. When old Jim Peterson came by 2 weeks ago, offering to send his boy over with feed and a strong back, she'd said no. Flatly. Kindly. Stupidly. She didn't want charity. Didn't want pity. Didn't want to be one more burden people whispered about in church. The Mitchell girl, limping and starving in her dead father's house. No thank you. Now, the storm outside wasn't bluffing. The frost etched itself across the windows like white veins. The horizon had vanished beneath gray. She leaned on the crutch and limped toward the back door, opened it to the wind, and stared toward the barn. The horses were still in there, Thunder and May, her father's last 2 breeding pair. She'd fed them at dawn. Hay was running low, but she wasn't going to let them die. Not them. Not yet. A gust hit her full in the chest, and she staggered back into the house, the door slamming shut behind her. She sat down hard in the chair nearest the stove and stared at the flames. A piece of her wanted to cry, but tears took energy, and she couldn't afford the luxury. She swallowed it down like old whiskey and turned to stare at the pile of letters on her desk. Most of them were from Boston, from Martha, her sister, pleading with her to leave the ranch, to come east, to live in town where there were doctors and trains and soft things. But those people didn't understand that this land wasn't just dirt and fences. It was her inheritance. Her father had died mending that north fence. Her mother had planted the orchard behind the barn with her bare hands. To walk away now would be to let go of everything that ever made sense. Still, she felt the weight of their worry, and the weight of the cold. She wrapped herself tighter in the old sweater and closed her eyes for just a moment. 10 miles away, Jackson Hayes folded the telegram again and again, the creases sharp as blades. He stood at the window of his study, the Double H ranch already tucked in for the coming storm. His men had loaded the barns, his livestock sheltered, every precaution taken. He should have felt at peace. But he didn't. The telegram sat on his desk like a ghost. Amelia Mitchell, injured, alone, supplies low, storm coming. Jackson hadn't seen Amelia since the summer social last year. They hadn't even spoken then. But he remembered her, quiet, capable, with a sharp eye and a way of holding herself like she didn't need anyone. He admired that, respected it, and he hated it, because once, a long time ago, his sister Mary had been the same. Strong, proud, alone. She died in her sleep after the firewood ran out in a storm, just like this. They found her days too late, curled in her bed, a half-written letter to Jackson on the table. He wasn't about to make that mistake again. Mike, his foreman, stepped into the room. "Storm's ahead of schedule. You riding out?" Jackson grabbed his coat. "Thomas is saddled." Mike frowned. "You're really going?" "If I wait, she'll die. If I go now, maybe not." "You can't carry the world, Jackson." He looked at the fire, then back at the telegram. "No, but I can carry one woman." Outside, the wind had already started, the kind that howled and snapped at your coat, like a jealous dog. Thomas, the bay stallion bred for mountain storms, was ready at the gate, saddlebags packed with food, medicine, and one of Cook's hot broth sealed in wool. 2 days, Jackson told Mike. "If I'm not back, send a search party. But not before." Mike gave a silent nod, one hand resting on the fence rail. "Godspeed, boss." As Jackson rode out, the wind slammed into him like a warning. He hunched lower in the saddle, letting Thomas lead the rhythm. Beneath them, the land had already begun to vanish into white. At the Mitchell Ranch, Amelia pulled her coat from the hook and gritted her teeth. The horses hadn't had water in hours. If the troughs froze, they'd dehydrate. She grabbed her crutch and limped toward the door. The barn seemed miles away now, the snow knee-deep in places. Each step was a fight. By the time she reached the halfway mark, her leg buckled and she hit the ground, face first in the snow. The cold rushed in like a knife to the ribs. She blinked up at the sky, endless and gray and unforgiving. Somewhere in the drift, her father's pocket watch had fallen from her coat. It ticked faintly, half buried. She tried to stand, but the pain was too much. Her limbs refused. She could hear her father's voice in her head, telling her not to quit, but her body had made other plans. After a long while, she turned back, crawled, dragged, wept, not because she was weak, but because she wasn't sure she'd ever be warm again. She reached the house and collapsed inside. The fire was down to embers. The room felt like a coffin. She pulled herself into her father's chair, the leather cold as stone, and clutched the pocket watch to her chest. It ticked, steady, merciless. Outside, the storm swallowed the last of the light, and far beyond, a rider moved through the white, heading toward a woman who hadn't yet given up, but didn't know how to keep going. The storm had become a living thing, clawing its way across the open land with blind fury. Snow came in sheets, not flakes, blinding and thick, falling sideways as the wind howled like a mourning animal. Jackson Hayes leaned low in the saddle, his scarf frozen stiff against his jaw, his beard crusted with ice. Thomas plowed forward through the deepening drifts, every muscle in the stallion's body straining against nature's siege. The compass trembled in Jackson's gloved palm, its brass face fogged with breath and cold, its needle barely legible. But he kept looking, kept riding, kept believing she was still alive. The trail was long gone, landmarks erased. The world had narrowed to a few feet in front of him. Thomas's strong neck, the curve of his mane glazed white, the ghosts of fence posts swallowed by snow. Jackson knew the way to the Mitchell Ranch like he knew his own heartbeat, but storms like this made men doubt the very ground they rode on. Still, he pressed on, hunger forgotten, pain dismissed. There wasn't room in his heart for comfort or fear, only a singular purpose: reach her, before it was too late. Each time the wind screamed louder, Jackson remembered Mary's face, his sister, frozen in her bed, her letter, half-written, her pride, as fatal as the cold. He hadn't listened to the nagging voice in his gut then, had let her independence convince him it wasn't his place to interfere. Now, every gust of wind was her voice reminding him, "Don't be too late again." Thomas stumbled once, falling chest-deep into a hidden drift. Jackson threw his weight back, steadied the reins, spoke gently to calm the horse. The stallion grunted, flanks heaving, then climbed out and pressed on. A lesser animal would have given up, but not Thomas, and not Jackson. He caught a scent, faint but real horses. Sweat, hay, something living. Then shadows emerged from the storm. A line of fence. A sagging roof. He squinted against the gale. A barn. The Mitchell barn. He nearly shouted, the sound torn from his throat before it could leave his lips. The ranch house appeared next, dark and wind-battered. No light from the windows. No smoke from the chimney. He dismounted and staggered to the porch, snow already past his knees. The door was frozen shut. He struck it once with his shoulder. It groaned but held. Again, and again. On the third blow, the ice cracked, and the door burst inward with a sound like shattering bone. The cold inside was even worse than he feared. The kind that doesn't just touch skin. It wraps around your lungs, bites your bones. "Miss Mitchell," he called out, voice raw. Nothing. The storm swallowed his words. He moved forward, lantern in one hand, rifle slung tight across his back. The beam of light swept across still furniture and frost-dusted walls. No signs of life. Then, in the kitchen, he saw her. She lay crumpled on the floor by the stove, her limbs folded in on themselves, like a bird that had fallen mid-flight. Her hair was damp, her lips tinged blue, and her fingers were curled around something, the chain of a pocket watch, gleaming faintly in the lantern's light. She didn't move. Jackson crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees. Her skin was ice-cold, but when he pressed fingers to her neck, there it was, a pulse. Faint fluttering, but there. "Thank God," he breathed, already unbuttoning his coat. He wrapped her in it, lifted her carefully, and held her against his chest. She was so light, too light. Her bones felt hollow. "You hold on," he said, voice cracking. "You've made it this far. Don't quit now." He moved fast, set her gently in the rocker near the stove, unwrapped her from her wet clothes, dried her limbs with a wool blanket, worked in silence, but not in panic. He built a fire with the kindling she had left, then used the wax-sealed matches he'd brought. Flames bloomed. Heat returned in increments. He melted snow for water, added broth, brought it to her lips. She didn't drink. He coaxed her with a whisper. She sipped once, then twice. Still no words. He wrapped her tighter, sat beside her through the night, watching for signs. When the color began to return to her cheeks, when her chest rose more steadily, he allowed himself to breathe. Her fever was high, but not beyond hope. And finally, hours later, her eyelids fluttered. She blinked slowly, as if waking from a long, terrible dream. Her lips parted, and a whisper came out. "Are you real?" "As real as snow," Jackson said gently, lifting a cup. "Small sips. You're safe now." She drank, just barely, then turned her face away. "The horses," she murmured. "They're fine," he said. "I checked the barn first. Watered and fed." Her eyes opened wider. "Who?" "Jackson Hayes," he said, adjusting the blankets. "Double H, Jim Peterson sent word." "The rich one," she muttered, voice nearly inaudible. He smiled faintly. "Guilty." Her lips trembled. "Didn't ask for help." "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." They were both quiet. The fire cracked. Snow hissed against the windows. She stared into the flames, her expression unreadable. Then, with great effort, she asked, "Why did you come?" He swallowed hard, then crouched to meet her eyes. "Because I've seen what happens when pride wins. I lost someone once. Just like you. Alone. Stubborn. Strong." She didn't ask either. By the time I showed up, it was too late. Something flickered in Amelia's eyes. Recognition, guilt, maybe understanding. "I'm not her," she said softly. "No, but you were about to be." She didn't argue, just stared at the fire as if trying to remember how to believe in heat again. He fed more wood into it and sat down beside her. Every few minutes, he checked her pulse. Stronger now, her breathing more even. She dozed, then woke again. "How long have you been here?" "Since last night." "I don't remember." "You wouldn't. Fever's been high." She shifted. The movement drew a sharp breath. "My leg. I know. It's set badly. I brought medicine." Her voice turned flat. "Too late to fix it." "Maybe not, but that's for later." She didn't respond. The silence stretched until she whispered, "I tried to get to the barn." "I saw," he said. "The tracks. The fall. I almost didn't come back." He nodded slowly. "But you did." A long pause. Then, "Thank you." He turned to her. Her eyes were glassy, but focused now. Her hand found his, and for a moment, they just sat in the warm light, two people who hadn't expected to survive each other. Later that day, she managed to sit up. He helped her sip broth again. They didn't speak much, but something had shifted. Not trust yet, but the soil had been turned, the seed of it planted. That night, she slept longer, deeper. Her fever broke just before dawn. Jackson stayed awake beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. Her journal lay open on the table. He skimmed the entries. Each line told a story of quiet, brutal survival. 1/4 cups of oatmeal, weather reports, inventory like eulogies. Then, near the bottom of one page, written with a shaking hand, "God help me when it runs out." Jackson closed the journal and fed another log into the fire. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. When she woke again, the snow had stopped. The world outside was silent, draped in white like a sleeping animal. Amelia turned her head and looked at him clearly. "You stayed." He poured her more broth. "Of course. You don't know me." "I didn't need to. I knew enough." She looked away. "I should have accepted help sooner." "Maybe. But you survived long enough for help to arrive. That's something." A ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. "You're good at this." "At what?" "Not making people feel ashamed." He met her gaze. "I've had practice." They shared a quiet meal. She took the cup from him, this time without protest. And when she asked him to tell her about his sister, he did. He told her everything. And she listened. The fire between them glowed brighter than before. By evening, she was sitting in her father's rocker again, watching the flames. Jackson repaired the drafty window pane, patched the door. He moved like he belonged there, without assuming he did. "I'm not good at depending on people," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "Just don't shut the door before I knock." Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, warmth held. It wasn't just the fire, it was something else. The quiet knowing that they'd both been changed by what had happened here. And that something new, fragile, possible, had begun. Amelia reached out, her hand brushing his lightly. "I'm glad you came." Jackson looked at her, then gently, honestly answered, "So am I." The storm had answered her prayer, not with words, but with a man who didn't try to save her pride, only her life. And the fire didn't go out again that night. The morning sun filtered through frost-laced glass, turning the kitchen's worn wooden walls into gold and ash. Amelia sat in her father's chair, wrapped in a quilt Jackson had pulled from the storage chest, her mother's old one, faded blue with stitched sunflowers, the seams worn soft by time and touch. In her hands, she cradled a steaming cup of coffee, real coffee, not the watery bitterness she'd stretched for weeks. Her hand still trembled slightly, but the heat seeped through her bones like a promise. Across from her, Jackson leaned against the stove, his coat hung over a chair to dry, his hair damp from hauling water to the horses. He sipped from a battered tin mug, but his eyes were on her, not in a way that watched for weakness, in a way that noticed every movement, every breath, every flicker of color returning to her face. "Best coffee I've had in a year," she said softly. He smiled, the kind that showed in his eyes more than his mouth. "You say that now. Wait until you've had Cook's second batch." Amelia looked down into her cup, the steam curling upward. "You keep acting like I'm going to make it." "You already did," he said, quiet but sure. The fire in the stove cracked, the log inside collapsing inward with a soft roar. The warmth wrapped around them both. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel hollow. She felt here. When she stood, testing her weight, the cane Jackson had carved was already beside her. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't watched him work on it. But the moment her hand curled around the smooth grip, she knew. It had been made for her. Oak, carved with running horses, her initials burned into the base. A balance of beauty and utility, just like her mother had taught her to value. She glanced over at him, and the corner of his mouth lifted. You made this. I did. It's good. Jackson shrugged, suddenly bashful. Tried to carve what I see. That stopped her. Her heart stilled just for a breath. He wasn't talking about the cane. She moved across the room slowly, testing each step, her legs still aching but stronger now. The rhythm was different. Not fast, not easy, but hers. Out in the barn, repairs had begun. Jackson's men, Mike and 2 others, had arrived just before dawn, bringing timber, tools, and a quiet respect for the woman whose ranch had nearly frozen to death. Amelia had hesitated before stepping outside. Pride still lingered like frost in the corners of her soul. But she walked out anyway, cane in one hand, the other curled around a list of repairs. The barn's south wall groaned under wind from the last storm. Boards had splintered, nails rusted through. Jackson was already kneeling in the snow when she reached him, sleeves rolled to the elbow, measuring joists and checking angles. "You're early," she said, trying not to sound winded. "So are you," he answered, not looking up. "Shouldn't be on that leg." "It's my barn," she replied. "Not yours." His smile widened. "Noted." She watched the men work, their movements efficient, wordless. They didn't stare, didn't comment on the cane, didn't offer help unless asked. And when Amelia pointed out the weakened beam and suggested a cross brace, design her father had used, Jackson nodded without hesitation and relayed the instruction. "She's the boss here," he said simply, when Mike raised an eyebrow. It wasn't a performance. It was truth. By midday, she was exhausted. Her leg throbbed, and the cold bit at the tips of her fingers. But the barn already looked stronger. Inside, Thunder and May watched with calm eyes as the new beams went up. Even the wind seemed to quiet. Back in the kitchen, Amelia lowered herself into the chair and pulled her journal close. But instead of inventory, she wrote about the light in the barn, about the way Jackson knelt in the snow without complaint, about how the hands followed her instructions like she hadn't been half dead 2 days ago. She didn't know what this was becoming, this strange rhythm between survival and something else, but it was shaping her. Later, Jackson came in with a basket of split kindling and a face flushed from wind. He set it near the stove, brushed the snow from his shoulders, and turned to her. "Barn will be finished in 2 days, if the weather holds." She nodded. "Good." He hesitated. "You're not just surviving now." "No, you're rebuilding." Amelia looked up at him. We're rebuilding." The words settled in the air like a decision. They spent the evening sharing dinner, hardtack, warmed beans, and cooked sealed broth. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like a feast. They talked about their fathers, about the mistakes they'd made, the fences they'd mended, the storms they'd ridden through. And when Jackson said, "I never meant to take over," Amelia answered, "I know. That's why I'm letting you help." The next morning, she woke to his shadow in the doorway, the scent of coffee already drifting through the air. He'd lit the stove early, let her sleep. Outside, the world was quiet again, snow melting in patches that revealed hard earth and straw. They walked the fence line together, her pace slow, his matching hers. Jackson carried extra wire and a hammer, repairing breaks while she pointed them out. Her leg hurt, but the pain had shifted. It wasn't hopeless now. It was just part of the day. "You ever think about merging ranches?" he asked, casual but careful. Amelia stopped walking. "Merging? You've got the best breeding stock in the territory. I've got the reach and resources. It'd make sense. You want to buy me out?" "No," he said quickly. "Not buy. Partner." She studied him, noticed how he wasn't trying to win her over, just laying it out, like a blueprint. Clear lines, strong foundation. "I'll think about it," she said at last. He nodded, and they kept walking. That night, the wind came back. Not a storm, just a warning. A reminder that winter hadn't surrendered. Jackson brought in another load of wood. Amelia made the fire herself, hands steadier now. She didn't have to ask for help to do it. She just did it. He watched from the table, his presence quiet and grounding. They talked again, this time about more than fences and supplies. About why she'd stayed on this land. About the first foal she'd ever delivered. about the letter from her sister Martha, still sitting unread by the window. She wanted me to come east. Said this place would kill me. And now, Amelia traced a knot in the wood grain of the table. Now it feels like it's keeping me alive. Jackson leaned forward. You've built something here. It's not weakness to share the weight. No, she said. It's harder than doing it alone. He reached across the table, not touching her, just close enough. You don't have to decide tonight, or tomorrow. I'm not asking for everything, just space beside you. Her breath caught, not from fear, from recognition, that someone saw her, not as a woman to rescue, but as a woman to stand with. I'll think about it, she whispered again. He nodded, and this time, they didn't fill the silence. On the third day, she woke to a house that felt warmer, stronger, fuller. The barn was solid. The stores were replenished. And her leg, though aching, could bear her weight long enough to stand at the stove and make coffee for them both. She handed Jackson a cup without ceremony. He took it like a gift. Sleep well, he asked. Better. You look better. I feel, she paused. Searched. Like I can breathe again. The air between them felt different now. Not charged. Not cautious. Just steady. Like the land under snow, waiting for spring. Jackson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Legal script. Partnership terms. Not aggressive. Just prepared. Amelia looked at it, then at him. Not yet, she said. I know. But soon. His smile was soft. Whenever you're ready. She left it on the table. Didn't touch it, but didn't hide it either. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky stretched blue overhead, and the edges of the land began to thaw. Amelia stepped onto the porch, her cane steady under her palm. Jackson stood beside her. Not behind, not ahead, beside. Together, they looked out over the ranch that nearly took her life, and now might give it back. The fire they'd built wasn't just in the stove. It was between them. Quiet, enduring, ready. The crocus bloomed without ceremony. Just a small purple miracle pushing through the crusted edge of melting snow by the south fence. Amelia noticed it on a morning that smelled of thaw and wood smoke, the kind of morning where breath no longer steamed in the air and silence didn't feel so heavy. She bent carefully, her healing leg steady now beneath her, and touched the fragile petals. Papa always said the first flower of spring was God's way of promising winter wouldn't last forever. Jackson stood nearby, leaning on the fence with arms crossed, eyes on her instead of the bloom. Your papa sounds like a wise man. He would have liked you, she said, straightening with the help of her cane, once he got past the whole rich rancher from up the hill part. Jackson grinned. And how long would that have taken? Oh, she drawled, brushing snow from her skirt. Longer than it took me. It had been just over a month since he rode through the storm. A month since she nearly froze to death, clinging to her father's watch and her own stubborn pride. In that time, the barn had been fully repaired. The stores had been replenished. Her leg, under Jackson's care and steady encouragement, had regained strength she hadn't dared hope for. And between them, something else had begun to mend, something unspoken, but deeply real. Jackson moved to her side without speaking, just matching her pace as they walked along the fence line. Their fingers brushed once, and he didn't pull away. Neither did she. The partnership agreement still sat on the kitchen table, untouched for days. Not forgotten, just waiting. They both knew what it meant. Merging her breeding program with his empire was no small decision. But Amelia had already made the harder one. She had let him stay. Let him help. Let herself lean. They reached the eastern pasture, where Thunder's daughter, Maybelle, grazed under the sun with a slight roundness to her belly. The vet had confirmed it twins. A rare gift. A sign. Jackson studied the mare, his expression proud. You've got something special here, Amelia. Oui, she corrected. This foal's yours too. He looked at her, something quiet blooming in his gaze. You really mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horse flick her tail and nose through the brittle grass. Then Amelia turned toward him, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. I've been thinking, she said, her tone steadier than she felt. About everything. The ranch. The partnership. You. He waited, never pushing. I used to believe accepting help meant I'd failed. She went on. That if I couldn't handle things alone, I didn't deserve the land my father died for. But I was wrong. It's not about doing everything alone. It's about doing the hard things with someone who makes you stronger. Jackson's throat worked silently. You're ready. She nodded. To sign. To merge the herds. To build something new. And the other thing? He asked softly. Amelia smiled, heart thudding. That too. They walked back to the house together, the crocus glowing behind them like a sentinel. On the porch, the carved cane leaned where she always left it, a symbol of what she'd overcome and what she'd accepted. She didn't need it to get across the threshold anymore. But she took it anyway, not out of weakness, but gratitude. Inside, she reached for the contract. Jackson moved beside her, retrieving a pen from the cabinet. He didn't hover. He just stood near, quiet and steady. When the ink dried beside both their names, Amelia looked down at the paper, then up at the man who had signed it with her. I was dying when you found me. You were surviving, he corrected. Barely, but you were still fighting. I didn't think anyone would come. I didn't think I could stay away. That night, they sat in front of the fire, no longer strangers, no longer uncertain. Her head rested against his shoulder, and his arm was warm around her waist. Outside, the land groaned with the memory of winter, but the snow no longer threatened. Inside, laughter filled the spaces where silence had once ruled. A letter arrived the next morning. Her sister, Martha, visiting this summer. Need to meet the man who managed to partner with my stubborn little sister. It read. Amelia showed Jackson, who laughed and folded the letter in half. Should I be worried? Terrified, she said, grinning. The days passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Repairs gave way to expansion. Hands from both ranches worked side by side, hauling timber for the new breeding barn. They painted a new brand together, a combination of the Double H and the Mitchell M. The first calf to where it would be born any day now. But as everything settled, Amelia noticed something else in Jackson. A quiet waiting. A question he hadn't asked again since the storm passed. A pause, as though he knew pushing would cost her trust. It came to a head one afternoon when they found themselves alone, the sky soft with approaching dusk, a wind stirring the half-thawed earth. Jackson had just finished repairing the last hitching post. Amelia stood nearby, arms folded, watching the way he wiped his brow with the back of his hand, the way his shoulders moved beneath the worn linen of his shirt. He looked up at her, almost startled by the intensity of her gaze. You've been quiet, he said. I've been thinking, she replied. Dangerous pastime. Necessary one. He smiled, then waited. Amelia stepped closer, her boots crunching gravel. I want more than just the business, Jackson. His smile faded, replaced by something more reverent. You sure? I've never been surer of anything in my life. He reached out, hand brushing her jaw. Amelia Mitchell, are you asking? I'm not very good at declarations, she interrupted. But if there's room in your life for a stubborn woman with a limp and an opinion about everything. He kissed her before she could finish. The wind danced through the trees. The sky turned lavender, and the first star blinked open above them like a benediction. They didn't need vows. They didn't need fanfare. They had firelight, fence lines, and the knowledge that what they were building would outlast storms and seasons. 3 days later, Amelia stood at the ridge behind the barn, watching the sunrise spill across the ranch. The land no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. Shared. Loved. Alive. Jackson came up beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. You remember what you told me the day I found you. I said I didn't ask for help. And I said I gave it anyway. She leaned into him, heart full. I'm glad you did. They stood together as light spilled across the pasture, warming the crocus, the earth, and every place inside them that had once felt cold. The past had tested them. The storm had nearly buried them. But together, they had built something no frost could touch. Love. Partnership. A life rooted deep. And just as the crocus rose through snow, so too had they. Not fragile. but faithful, and ready for whatever came next.